in my days, sessions, I remember doing a session, and I was new to the business. I didn't read notes. I always worked by it and always prayed that any session I got would be an overdub at the end so it could be controlled.
Sure.
I get this session from a girl, get over here, we need a harmonica player quickly. And it was Val Doonican, and he was doing a track called Gypsy Woman. And he had the orchestra. It was a live thing with the Vernon's girls. And my position was right by the Vernon's girls. And I'm now pooing myself. I don't read. I've now got to work on timing only. I didn't know where the harmonica should come in. And one of the Vernon's girls sussed that I was being a bit, she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I'm shitting myself." I said, "I don't know where." She said, "Leave it with me." And she's looking at my parts while looking at hers. And as we got near, she gave me an elbow. And I was just a second out late. We'd done it 3 cuts, but the last cut, I actually got it. Never again. Every time I then got a book and it said, "Is it live or can I do it at the end?"
It's horrible when I started out not reading. I could read.
Well, you know what it's like.
It's fear. Yes, yeah. Sweaty armpits. And I was booked on a 50-piece orchestra session at Abbey Road with David Rose as the MD, the guy who wrote The Stripper. And I was working by listening. You join in with what everybody was playing and fit in. And during the second session, he cut the orchestra and said the fatal line. He said, "Mr. Bass Player, please play bars 69 to 79 for me, please." And 50 heads turned to see where the victim is. Yeah. You want to die. And I played something, and he was ever so sweet. He said, "Well, it's not what I've written."
Oh, bless him.
I learned to read. It's just there's too much fear.
Well, the only repeat on that one for me was Twiggy with the BBC Orchestra. And I got a session there, but I managed to get the music, get a mate of mine to, give me the cue so that I knew when I went in the studio I'd get away with it. And I passed with flying colours on that one. So I learnt my lesson.
Judd talking about the Beatles, I did a radio thing on them. And I talked to one of the girls who used to work at NEMS in Brian Epstein's record store. And I said, when did you really think Liverpool had lost the Beatles? And she said, well, in 1962, NME asked Paul McCartney what his favourite meal was, and he said it was egg and chips. In 1963, they asked him, he said it's crepes Suzette, and she thought, we're not going to be seeing them again. She thought.
Actually, a true Beatles story. I moved in when I came to London, trying to get session work. I had nowhere to stay, so Neil Aspinall, Nell, put me up, and he had a rather posh house in Sloane Street. Anyway, I'm there one night, and Neil said, he said, "Oh, I'm going to meet Patty and George later for a meal." He said, "Do you want to come along?" I said, "Oh, yeah. But don't forget, my etiquette was fish and chips and a napkin. I'd just come up from Liverpool. So anyway, we go to the Della Tusa in the King's Road. And I don't know whether you remember, but the menu is all in Italian. And I'm trying to be posh. And I'm sort of looking, I'm thinking, oh, shit, you know what? Everything I hated, I ordered. And I could see them tucking in. It's like, I didn't like fish at the time. So I'm putting lettuce over the head of the fish to look as if I've eaten it. Anyway, as we're walking, so the next thing is we're going to go off to a club. And we go out and there's Patty, George in front, me and Neil behind. And we're walking along the King's Road. This girl dropped a scarf in front of him. And she dropped the scarf, and George picked it up and said, "Excuse me, love, you dropped your scarf." She turned around, saw him, and said, "It's a Beatle!" All hell fucking let loose, and off we zoomed. I never got to that club, but and that's where they went posh, because he was having souffle and something else, whereas it would have been, you know, egg and chips and sausages at Joe's Cafe up near Seal Street, Liverpool.
I've just got a new accountant, and stick with it. And my brother-in-law recommended, and he was talking to her, and I can't believe how I came up in the conversation. I said, "What does your brother-in-law do?" He write books, and he's writing a book about the Beatles at the moment. And my brother-in-law's accountant in Ulster in the West Midlands said, "Oh, my dad used to be in the Beatles." And Robert said, "So I think I would have known if the surname was Lennon or McCartney." He said, "No, it's Chas Newby." And it's true. Chas Newby he played 4 gigs with the Beatles. He was on bass. They came back from Hamburg. Stewart had stayed in Hamburg to be with Astrid. They couldn't find a bass player. Yep. So Chas Newby played 4 gigs, including the Litherland Town Hall, I think December 1960, which they reckon is the gig that really got the Beatles going. They came back from Hamburg and they were hot to go. So my accountant now, my accountant's father used to be in the Beatles.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I'm still in touch with Pete's Rogue Best, who was Neil's son. Which not a lot of people know about that scenario. They've got the Casbah, which they're now revamping and opening as a tourist attraction. There you go.
I used to eat in an Indian restaurant just off Westbourne Grove. It's called the Durbar. And nothing famous about it, except it was Spike Milligan's local as well. And he had an office nearby. And every now and then you'd see him eating in there with a different woman every time. And I just left him alone. It's the whole thing, you know, what you mustn't do is go over and gush and tell him how wonderful he is. You just leave him alone. And this went on for years. And then one night I happened to be at the next table to him. I was still ignoring him. And at the end of my meal, I got my wine glass. You know, you do that on the wine glass.
Yeah, the noise.
Makes a tone, like a whistle.
Yeah.
I was just doing that absent-mindedly, and he joined in. And because he had a different amount of wine in his glass, it was about a semitone lower. And that was my excuse. I turned to him and said, "Yours is lower than mine." And he said, "That's because I'm older than you."
Oh, brilliant. I did an interview with Spike Milligan once, and it was a radio interview. And at the end, I just told Spike, you know, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. And he held out his hand and went, "That'll be £1, please."
Sounds like an MTV contract.
Well, Milligan always was talking about the money. Where's the money? And I was lucky enough to know him, and I interviewed him a couple of times. And you know, like a very good British comic like Tommy Cooper, or there are people, for some reason, when they say something, it's funny. That no one else, if anyone else said something like that, it wouldn't be funny. And so I'm at Spike's house with the BBC filming for something. We're talking about his favourite records. And I just innocently said, "What's your favourite Beatles records? What's your favourite?" I'll do it again. So I was at Spike Milligan's house, and we were just talking about records and the Beatles, funnily enough. And there are some people in life, just if they just say something, it's funny. And it's just because it's them. And for some reason, when Spike Milligan said an ordinary thing, it was funny. And there's no real reason for that. It was very odd. And I said to him, quite innocently on camera, I said, talking about the Beatles, what about yesterday? And he looked at me and said, "Yesterday it was raining." And for some reason, that was funny. Yeah. The cameraman fell off his stool, and we had to stop filming for 20 minutes while the crew recovered.
That's the inflection, yeah. But there are loads of stories. I like the ones at Top of the Pops and things that go wrong and embarrassing moments. And there was one classic where I had to promote a record that I wasn't too fond of, but it caught the imagination of the UK public. And it was an Australian Italian called Joe Dolce, who wasn't Italian at all. And the track was called "Shut Up Your Face." Anyway, I worked the record, and a dear friend of mine had another record out called Vienna, Midge. So I'm trying to keep this record from Midge, and I think, well, Joe Dolce's will peak at about 20, drop down, but it didn't. It kept going and going, and it got to the point where Midge and it were competing. And of course, Joe Dolce got to the number 1 position, and Vienna got to number 2. But I always remember that Pops, where I was in the studio with Joe Dolce, and he asked me to put a blackboard up and point out the lyrics as they were filming. And I'm looking at Midge getting set up on the other stage, and him looking at me as if daggers could fucking kill. And I'm like, I'm awfully sorry. It's the record company, not me. And the rest was history. I mean, Dolce made shitloads of money, lived happily ever after. But Midge, although number 2, it did win the Best Record of the Year award for music and content. And so there you go.
The thing is, Judd, that means nothing to me at all.